Regards from Danielle Radnitsky, cantor from Temple Bethel,
Charlotte. Yeah. She's new there, right?
Oh, she's wonderful. I went up there for our first great-grandchild.
I haven't met her yet, but I've heard of her.
Yeah, she said you put her on friended with her. So a lot of people know you up there, of course.
Yeah.
So.
Did she know who I was?
Our first great-grandchild was born in Charlotte, and the rabbi wasn't available, so she did the bris part, and then they had, the prayers and everything. It's just a lovely young lady.
Oh, good.
Great. I know Rabbi Barris. Please tell him.
Yeah.
Hello.
I don't think we've actually met in person, but I know her.
It's a female.
Yeah. I know who she is, though.
Yeah. The rabbi wasn't available.
Yeah, Asher.
Day, yeah.
Okay, he's a good guy.
Yeah.
So, very nice.
We had to postpone the bris because of we ended up with
I need to make an announcement.
Oh, okay, you got it.
Okay.
You got it.
Anyway.
Well, good. Tell her I said hello. All right, Bill, I need your help.
Folks, can I have a moment? I know you've heard this the last 2 weeks, but excuse Bob.
We got an announcement.
We are in the process of collecting nominations for this year's folks.
Welcome to my world.
Listen to Mr. Dangerfield, please. Thank you. We are in the midst of collecting nominations. Nominations close on September 21st. They either have to be into us meaning myself and Norman, against Baseman. You can email them back. You can bring them back to Keppel. We'll make sure it gets there. If you did not get a form last week, we would like to make sure that you do have a form. Jeff?
I'm a bad boy. I don't even miss her.
Anybody else? Bobby? Yes. Okay. Yes, please go. Okay. Here comes the judge. Thank you very much. What's your part? Alex, you need one? You already given me one. Is there anybody else who would like a form? Okay, you'll be here. Thank you.
All right. Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So, thank you. I appreciate your patience as I went to Israel for a week and then took my daughter to college.
Which was more traumatic?
Both were emotional. I heard you had a wonderful couple of classes without me, and so I'm not going to be here much anymore. You had such a good time. I guess I'd rather sleep in once in a while. So I'll be here. Yeah, I'll be here sporadically going forward. I'm just all right.
Sounded good.
Yeah. No, this is the highlight of my week. Okay, here we go. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Beini uven v'nei Yisrael oti le'olam, oti le'olam. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et HaShabbat ledorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et hashabbat lasod et hashabbat ledorotam berit olam uvayom Shabbat vaynafash, Shabbat vaynafash, Shabbat v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-shabbat lasot et ha-shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Amen. L'chaim. Okay.
Great water walk.
And a blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. So, 2 weeks ago I was in Israel, and so a little plug for my lunch and learn this coming Tuesday at noon in the same room was really, I go to Israel a lot, but this was a very unique trip. I did a lot of things I've never done before, including meeting with the chief rabbi of the IDF, the chief doctor of the IDF, and the chief lawyer of the IDF. One of the leaders of the Mossad and one of the leaders of the Shin Bet. So I have a lot of stuff to share. I got a great slides, and I guarantee you, it's going to be stuff you've never heard before. There were even times where they told us, don't repeat this. And I can't wait to tell you all of it. So if you're available, it's noon on Tuesday. It'll also be streamed, so you can watch it from wherever you want in the world. If you're, at your desk somewhere and you want to tune in at noon, it'll be here. So, okay, Torah study. Torah portion is called Ve'et Chanan, which is the second Torah portion in the book of Deuteronomy, and we're going to begin at the very beginning of the portion, which is in an unusual spot. Chapter 3, verse 23 of Deuteronomy. Chapter 3, verse 23, which is the very beginning of the portion. Okay, now, this is a famous portion with regard to prayer. Okay? Now, prayer in Judaism is a bit of a mystery. 2 weeks ago, I went to the Great Synagogue in, if you know where that is, right across from where the Sheraton used to be, in Western Jerusalem. And but I went to the Kotel after, and the people are still davening. Actually, I went Friday morning too. I davened in my hotel room and then walked to the Kotel, and I was going to study. When you go to the Kotel, there's like a room underneath there on the men's side, and I was going to go in there and study, but they were cleaning the floors, and so you couldn't get to where they keep the Talmud books. You could try, but there was a guy who would yell at you, and so it wasn't an ideal setting. It wasn't an ideal setting in the ideal setting. But, they're getting ready for Shabbos. It was Friday morning. But, you go there and you see people davening, and they're really into it. These guys, they're really, really into it. And you could ask them, what are you doing? What are you into? Just read it. What are you doing? What's going on in your mind that's so you know. And so you could say, Sherry and I were talking about this yesterday, but I just read his book about Rav Kook. Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of Mandatory Palestine. He's also the rabbi who ordained my great-grandfather. That's not what he's famous for. But he was not very well liked by the ultra-Orthodox, even though he was ultra-Orthodox. And the reason why was because he accepted the Zionists and became sort of the father of religious Zionists, even though those Zionists weren't Orthodox. And he said that through Zionism, they'll come to Judaism. And the ultra-Orthodox said, you just forget about them. They're secular. They're not, don't. So there was once a rabbi who was defending Rav Kook to his students. Because they say, Rav Kook, he talks to the secular. And he said, I wish that you all davened on Yom Kippur the way he davens a regular weekday. So what does that mean? It means that he was able to get to such spiritual heights on a regular Tuesday that they couldn't even reach on Yom Kippur. Which means that there's a skill to it, that you could be better at it. Now, how do you know how good you are at it? It's how well you can do that. I don't know. I don't know how you could tell. You know, the comedian Modi says, if he's telling a non-Jew, what's mincha? Mincha is when a few of us are going to go mumble into the wall. That's mincha. That's what we call mincha. But there's something. He's a comedian. You know, I'm just freelance with the comedy. There's something to it where you could, when you pray, you could do it better or worse. What exactly does that mean? I'm not sure. And how exactly does God decide what prayers he's going to answer? It's an interesting question, which I'd like to explore. And you'll see why I bring it up for this week's Torah portion. It all comes from the very first word, ve'et chanan, and what that word means. We'll look at it in a second. But let me just say this. I came across a theological problem when I was in Israel 2 weeks ago that really bothered me. And only this week when I was studying this portion was I able to answer it. So one of the things that I'll tell you in detail if you come on Tuesday, one of the places we went was the Sheba Hospital in Tel Aviv. The Sheba Tel HaShomer, which is one of the hospitals where some of the soldiers are rehabbing their injuries. And again, these are not pickleball injuries. Right? These are not, they tore their rotator cuff or they have a bone spur. These are you lost a limb or you're blind. I mean, these are beyond, severe. So you see these guys who lost both legs or are blind. And if you're one of those guys, then everyone who was around you is probably dead. You're like the one who survived. And a lot of these guys these days are very traditional in the army. The army has become much more spiritual, which is it's a whole different conversation. But I asked myself, if these guys, if God didn't answer their prayers when they were going to fight for the land of Israel, and they prayed, and they risked their lives and died, and God didn't answer their prayers, why would he answer mine? Why should I even bother? And as I was praying in Israel, thinking about those guys, and we met some of them with no legs and so forth, I said to myself, what am I even doing? Why would I even bother? If he's not going to answer that, why would he answer this? You see the problem? Okay, so that's the problem that I had. And it really bothered me. And when I came back and I started studying this week's Torah portion, I came up with an answer. So you'll decide if you think it's a good answer or not. You might not. Why do I say all of this? Moses had a prayer. He had one prayer, the one thing that he wanted that he couldn't have, which was to go into the land of Israel. And the Torah portion begins, Ve'et chanan. And Moses pleaded. And his plea was, God, I know what you said. But maybe from the time that you made the decree that I'm not going into the land of Israel till now, maybe something changed. Maybe it changed your mind. And God does change his mind sometimes. Remember, God said, I'm going to wipe out all the Jewish people, Moses, and start over with you. And Moses says, he can't do that. And God said, you're right, I won't do it. If he did, there'd be no Jewish people. Because God said he was going to wipe them all out. Moses said, you can't do that. The other nations are going to say, you took them out of Egypt just to wipe them out. He changes his mind. So Moses is hopeful that maybe God has changed his mind and he will be able to go into the land of Israel. So he's still pleading. And what we know is that Moses does not get to go in the land of Israel. And with all of Moses' pleading and praying, the answer is still no. Now, you know the joke about the kid who wanted the bike for Hanukkah. He prays on the first day of Hanukkah, all I want is a bike. First day of Hanukkah, no bike. Second day, he's praying, goes to open his gifts, no bike. Goes through all 8 days, no bike. Says to his parents, I can't believe this. I prayed. All I wanted was a bike. Why didn't God answer my prayers? His father said, God did answer your prayers. His answer was no. Right? Takes a while. For those who didn't get it, stay after, I'll explain it. But, okay, so this is the case with Moses. He prays and prays. All he wants to do is go in. The answer, no. So we look at us and say, why would he answer my prayer? He doesn't answer Moses'. Okay, so we have questions. All right, so let's get into it. Chapter 3, verse 23. Ed, would you get us going?
Sure.
Okay.
I pleaded with the Lord at that time, saying, O Lord God, you who let your servant see the first works of your greatness and your mighty hand, you whose powerful deeds no God in heaven or earth can equal, let me, I pray, cross over and see the good land on the other side of the Jordan, that good hill country and the Lebanon. But the Lord was wrathful with me on your account and would not listen to me. The Lord said to me, enough, never speak to me of this matter again. Go up to the summit.
Okay, so thank you. In verse, I don't want to spend much time on this, but in verse 26, God says to Moses, enough. Now, in Hebrew, how does he say enough? He says, Rav lach. Right? Rav can mean rabbi, but it also means like a lot, like Todah, Rabbah. Right? Rav, Rabbah is the same word. Okay? Lach means you. Enough of you. That's too much of you. Don't ask again. But there was one rabbi, I forget who it was, who makes the connection between that word Rav and a different time we hear the word Rav in the Torah, the Eruv Rav. Who's the Eruv Rav? The mixed multitudes. Remember? And the mixed multitudes were the Egyptians who said, we want to go out with the Jews and be Jewish because we saw all of the miracles that God did. And so some of those Egyptians went out and they were Egyptian and they wanted to be Jewish. And really what we find out is they were the Khartoumim. They were the class of magicians. They were the one, remember Pharaoh had magicians who could do this and do that. And they were the ones who said, wow, we can do magic, but your God's better than we are, so we want to go out with you. But they never got rid of their idols. And they're the ones who caused the golden calf. And they're the ones who instigated the Jews to sin. And so when Moses says, it's you who caused me to sin, but the Torah uses that word Rav, it might be a clue that what he's really saying is, there were those among you, meaning you mixed multitude. It's your fault that I ended up being mad at you because you kept you could take it or leave it. It's just one idea that one rabbi had. I just throw it out there because I thought it was interesting. But what I really want to focus on is Moses' prayer. And the rabbis do a lot with the word ve'et chanan. Now, before we get to that, Rashi brings an interesting idea. Why would Moses think that God changed his mind, or that he didn't deserve to go into the land of Israel at one point in time, but maybe now he does? Why would he think that? So there's two answers. There's one answer that Rashi brings here, and then there's another answer that we can derive maybe from Genesis. So I want to show you both. So if you look at the top of the sheet, Rashi on this verse, 3:23. Judy, would you mind reading there? All forms of the verb chanan. Could you use the microphone?
All forms of the verb hanan signify an ex gratia gift.
Okay. Do you know what ex gratia gift means? Someone gives you a gift for nothing. In Hebrew, the expression is matanat chinam, or matnat chinam. Matana is a gift. Matnat, a gift. Chinam, that was given for free. In other words, you invited me over your house, so I'm giving you wine. That's not a free gift. Because you invited me, I give it to you. You walk in this morning and I just give you a bottle of wine out of the goodness of my heart for no particular reason. That's a free gift. So what Rashi's saying is, anywhere you see the word chanan in the Torah, if you look throughout the Torah, anytime because there are lots of different ways to say giving a gift, and this is an unusual way of pleading or asking for something. Anytime you see this gift, it means that it's a gift that's given for no reason. So what Moses is saying is, I didn't do anything to deserve this. I'm just asking for you to give it to me. And chanina in modern Hebrew means mercy. Right? You don't deserve it, but give it to me anyway. Okay? So that's an idea here. Okay, let's keep going.
Although the righteous might make a claim to reward depend upon their good deeds, yet they solicit from the omnipresent only an ex gratia gift, because he had said to him in Exodus, I will show you grace unto him to whom I will show grace. He, Moses, when referring to his entreaty of God, uses the expression.
Okay, so he's just now going to give a few examples of how anytime you see this word in the Torah, that's what it means. Now, what it's saying is, a righteous person like Moses could say, hey, I do a lot of mitzvahs, give me this gift. But righteous people don't do that. They would never ask for that. There's a whole lesson here on entitlement. Right? Whenever whenever you're told no, your first reaction is, do you know who I am? Right? Like, you don't have a parking spot for me here. Don't you know I'm a urologist? Right? Don't you know? Yeah, I mean, everybody's something, I remember once I was on a trip to Israel. This really stuck out in my mind. We got to the hotel. This was before I was at Beth Am. And the rooms weren't ready yet. So whenever you get to a hotel and the room's not ready yet, usually these days check-in time is like 11 p.m. And checkout time is like 6:45 a.m. That's how hotels work. No matter what time you show up. So, and when you've just come from Israel on a 14-hour flight, you finally get there. It's 9 a.m. You've been up for 26 hours. It's 9 a.m. You don't know what to do. You have, your room will be ready in 7 hours. Feel free to hang out in the lobby. What? So this happened once, and there was a lady who said, no. I get a room. Who are you? I don't, he said to the lady at the desk, I don't think you understand who you're dealing with. I get a room. Well, who are you? Well, I'm married to a periodontist. You know, I mean, don't you want, you know, everybody's special. So entitlement is quite a thing. You know, there's a whole lesson here. I read this and I thought, okay, there's a whole, but what Moses is saying is, I'm not asking for anything special. I just want to go into the land of Israel so I can do more mitzvahs. Because there are certain mitzvahs that you can only do in the land of Israel, and I want to do them. It's nothing for me. It's not that I want to go stay at the King David. My room won't be ready yet anyway. You know, it's not that I want to go to the buffet or whatever. I want to go plant a tree where you can only plant a tree and take the fruit and give it to God. I want to do those mitzvahs that can... Okay, so that's chanina, or ve'et chanan. Okay, second Rashi. If you look back in the verse, it says... When exactly did Moses offer this prayer? This is a very curious phrase. Look what it says. In Hebrew it says, V'etchanan el Hashem. And I pleaded God, and then what does it say? Ba'et hahi. What's ba'et hahi? At this time. So a good question would be, when was that? All the Torah tells us is, that this happened at a particular time, but we don't know what that time was. So if I said to you, I pleaded with you after I had just completed studying the whole Talmud, well, then maybe I might be intimating, actually I did do something. Or I might be saying, at a particular point in history, I pleaded to you on October 7th. Like maybe something very dramatic happened that day that changed the course of history. And that's actually the case here. It's not that Moses did something and he's asking for something, but he's pleading at a time where something dramatic just happened. And Rashi tells us what it is. So, if you look, Ken, would you read the second Rashi there? I implored grace of God at that time.
Implored grace of God at that time. After I had subdued the land of Sihon and Og, I thought that perhaps the vow that I should not enter the land was annulled, since this was part of the land of Canaan.
Right, because he conquered a land of Israel that was on the border, a nation that had a border with Israel, that he came in contact with the border, that he thought that meant that this was a sign that the previous decree was annulled and that he could go in. He thought that might have been the case. He thought he saw a message there. To which God said, very nice that you see that, Kamash Malan, as the Gemara would say. No. You might have thought that, but no. That's not the case. Yes?
You know, if you read the stuff right before this plea, I mean, they did. I mean, they went into this land, they killed everyone, men, women, children. It had to have been a horrible, horrible time.
Yes.
And, you know, it's not unreasonable. I mean, God said, go in and take the land. Well, they did.
Yeah.
And it would just seem...
100%. You know, and that's the same thing that happens to King David. Because King David is told you're not going to build the holy temple. Why? Because you have blood on your hands. Not blood that you killed people you were commanded to kill. But even though you did that, it caused a problem. And that problem is your hands are bloodied, and only your son Solomon, who's named Shlomo, Shalom, only the peaceful hands can build my temple. So there's a problem there. I admit we have a problem there. Yeah. Can you use the mic?
Kind of expanding on Judy's idea, I mean, I think that the people who were ready to go into Israel were really a new generation. It was not the old generation.
That's right.
And Moses was really of the old generation.
Ah, very nice.
And all of that had to affect them. They had to be some type of people, a certain type of people, a certain mentality. And it seems to me that God may have felt that since this was going to be the land of milk and honey, the land of growth, that perhaps it was not appropriate for the older generation really to go in with all of this background but rather a new generation.
Yeah.
So
Very good. And that's the difference between, that's why one of the things they're afraid of is that people are going to worship Moses. That's why we don't know where he's buried. Right? And there's this whole story in the Talmud about every time they thought they found where he was buried, it looked like he was somewhere else, and you're not supposed to know, because if we went there, we'd worship it. And Moses is a past, present, and future guy. He has different stages of his life. But God is Ehiyah Asher Ehiyah. I will be that which I will be, meaning God is past, present, and future at the same time. God is time. Right? There is no past, present, or future for God. And Moses, there is a past, present, and future, and his past, when it's over, it's over. So it's an interesting point. Okay, so one aspect of the prayer is that the righteous people, and by the way, this should be the way that we pray. We don't come into prayer and say, okay, here's all the good things I've done, so here, God's what I'm expecting. It doesn't work that way. Like I was listening to a lecture. Most of the lectures that I listen to are Orthodox rabbis teaching Orthodox students. And so this one rabbi was saying, this guy came to his rabbi and he said, I've been praying and praying and it's not working. And he said, how long have you been praying? A week. I've been praying day after day, 3 times a day for a whole week for something to happen. And the rabbi said, that's it? A week? And you expect, that's not that much. Pray for, yeah, keep going. You're on the right track, He said, that's it.
Or 500, or
So a lot of
515.
times we show up, once a year and say, all right, God, look, I'm here. It's Rosh Hashanah. Coming back in 9 days. I'll see you again the next year. And here's my list of what I want. And then they come back the next year. Where you been? It's not the way it works. You got to put some effort into it. Question?
How about 515 times? Will that be
Oh,
enough?
all right. You always steal my thunder. All right. Fine. So look on the back page. What is the... I don't want to give it away yet. Even though Ken gave it away, I don't want to give it away. Come back to the front for a second. Sorry. All right. So there's another idea that shows up a few different times in the Torah, but I brought a couple of different examples. So one is from the life of Abraham and one is from the life of Jacob. So if you look at, Ken, would you mind reading the Rashi on Genesis 15:1?
Wherever the term achar is used, it signifies immediately after the preceding event, whilst acharai signifies a long time afterwards.
Right, whilst means while.
Let's see. Achar hadavim ha'ela, after these things, means after this miracle has been wrought for him, in that he slew the kings, and he was in great anxiety, saying, perhaps I have already received in this God-given victory reward for all my good deeds. Therefore the Omnipresent said to him, Al tirei anochi magen locha. Fear not, Abram, for I am thy shield against punishment.
Okay, so consider this. The earliest, rabbis, the earliest prophets, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, they didn't really know how the system worked. They're just learning who's God, how does God work. So look, what it says here is, Abraham won this war. If you remember the war of the 4 kings against the 5 kings. So he helped win this war, and he slew the kings, and he was in great anxiety. So after he won the war, he was really nervous. Why is he so nervous after he won the war? And Rashi says, perhaps I've already received in this victory reward for all my good deeds. So he thought that the war that he just won was, for all the mitzvahs that he's been doing, that was his reward. But now, his mitzvah bank was empty, and he wasn't going to get any more reward. He had nothing to look forward to. That's not how it works, but he didn't know that because he was new at this. So it doesn't work like that. We know that now, but he didn't understand that. Oh, can you pass the mic to Diane?
So I thought that we were not supposed to believe that prayer was transactional. That you don't say,
That's right, we're not.
I wish my house isn't burning in that fire. Not to expect that God would, because you're a good person, God would say nothing bad would ever happen to you when you prayed for it. So this is kind of going against that.
Well, no, because look what happens. God says, fear not, Abraham. That's not the way it works. It doesn't work that way. The way that you thought, Abraham, the way that you thought it works, that's wrong. We don't do that. But he didn't know that. This is where he learned it. And so we learn it from him. Now, Jacob learns the same thing. Nachman. So there's a. I only brought the Nachmanides on it, but there's an event in Genesis chapter 28, and God promises Jacob, "You're going to be okay." He's about to go on this journey, and God says to him, "Fear not, Jacob, I'll be with you." So then, a few verses later, Jacob in 28:20, Jacob says, "If God is with me, or if God protects me on my journey and I make it there, then I'll worship God." And so we ask the question, why would Jacob say, if he's there with you, then you'll worship him? He already told you he would be. And so Nachmanides explains here, we don't have to look at it, but what Nachmanides says is, what was Jacob concerned about? He knew that God promised he would be okay, but he thought that maybe somewhere along the way he sinned. And because of his sin, because he did something wrong, that promise that God made for him is now gone. He thought that's how it worked. He was wrong. When God said to you, "I'm going to protect you," if you slip and fall, I heard this. I saw this funny video, and it was this Muslim guy calling. It was like a call-in show in some Muslim country where you called in an imam and asked a question about religion. And it was during Ramadan where you're not allowed to eat. And he said, "I accidentally slipped and fell, and a whole turkey sandwich fell down my throat. What should I do?" And I think he said, "I accidentally slipped, and a turkey sandwich and a cup of coffee just flew into my, So if Jacob somehow sinned by accident, on purpose, whatever, he was so worried about his own behavior that he thought that, so the earliest heroes, they didn't really understand how it worked. And that's what he thought. So God comes to him and says, "That's not the way it works. If I promised you, this is what's going to happen." But Moses also. Moses has this decree, and he's not sure how it works. And you can understand why, because he's seen God change his mind sometimes. He's seen so we're not really sure through the Torah how exactly does prayer work. And if Moses, Abraham, and Jacob don't really quite get it, how the heck are we supposed to get it? Right? So there's a problem here. Now, as Ken alluded to, why do we make such a big deal about prayer in this Torah portion? There are other places where we see people pray. Now, how many times a day are Jews supposed to pray? 3. What's the one day of the year we pray 5 times? Yom Kippur. And we fast. Do you know how many times a day Muslims pray? 5. And on Ramadan they fast because they modeled it after Yom Kippur. Ramadan is modeled after Yom Kippur. They steal all our good ideas. And then they come up with some bad ones on their own. Why 3 though? What's 3? Why Shachrit, Mincha, and Mariv? Why do Jews pray 3 times a day? Yes, exactly. Okay, so the real answer is we pray 3 times a day Because when the rabbis in the Talmud, when the second temple was destroyed, the rabbis had to come up with something to replace sacrifice. Because the way that we used to speak to God was through sacrifice. So what happened was, every Jew pretty much got a free pass every single day because the priests in the Holy Temple offered a sacrifice in the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. And that sacrifice that went up to God covered the obligation of every Jew. That was the gift of the Holy Temple. That because the priests were in there offering the sacrifice 3 times a day, and that sacrifice went up to God, every Jew's responsibility for communicating with God 3 times a day was covered. When the temple was destroyed, the rabbis said, we can't do that anymore, so how do we cover everyone's responsibility? So they had a choice. This is actually what I wrote my thesis on in rabbinic school, which was read by about 4 people. One of which is my dad, and one of which is my uncle. One of which is me. But my thesis was on the transition from sacrifice in the temple to prayer in the synagogue, which happened after the second temple was destroyed. So what they said was, we have a choice. And they narrowed it down to what's going to replace sacrifice. It's either going to be Torah study, Gemilut Chasadim, random acts of kindness, or prayer. And the reason that they chose prayer, even though it wasn't ideal, was because it was the only one that the community could do together. And they wanted the community to do it together. That's why they instituted the minyan, that you have to have at least 10 people, because it needs to be a communal. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So then they said, okay, prayer is what's going to replace sacrifices. And since we have sacrifices 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and night, we need 3 prayer services to replace each of the sacrificial services. Now, why originally did they have 3 sacrificial services? Because in the Torah, there are 3 paradigms. The first one is Abraham prayed in the morning, and there's a verse that said Abraham went out in the morning and prayed. There's another one that says Isaac went out in the afternoon, and there's another one that said Jacob went out in the evening. And from that, the rabbis inferred that there are 3 prayer services, and that's what the Torah is teaching us, when Abraham went out in the morning, and Jacob went out in the afternoon, and Isaac went out in the afternoon, and Jacob went out in the evening. Now, when they went out, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they started praying, what did they say? There was no Baruch Hu, there was no Tefillah, there was no Aleinu. Their prayers were what we call spontaneous prayer. They just went out and prayed what was on their mind. But the rabbis decided, once the temple was destroyed, if prayer is going to be communal, that we can't have spontaneous prayer anymore, because then we'd all come into the sanctuary and everyone would be saying different. They wanted to be together. So they came up with liturgy. And they said there's a problem with liturgy. The problem with liturgy is that it's fixed, and it becomes rote, and it becomes boring, and you do the same thing day after day. So they challenged the Jew and said, you need to bring something new to your prayer every single day, and that's what you're supposed to bring. That's your offering, even though the words are the same. Okay, now, so that's why we have 3 times prayer a day. But it didn't become mandatory to pray 3 times a day until after the temple was destroyed. And by the way, even then, if you were like in the 1st century CE and you went to a synagogue in the Galilee, and then you slept over a few days and you went to a synagogue in the Negev, the services would be completely different. And I don't just mean they did a different tune for Baruch Hu. They would be a lot different. Because, I mean, everyone knew Shema, everyone knew, they knew, but they didn't know the order and so forth. And the first prayer book wasn't written until 895 CE. Why? Because the Jews in Barcelona were so confused that they wrote a letter to the chief rabbi of Babylonia, whose name was Rav Amram Gaon, and he said, oh, you don't know what to do? And he said, first you do this one, and then you do this one, and then you do this one. And by the time he was done, he mailed that back to Barcelona. A few weeks ago, it just got there, right? However long it took to get a... But when they got that in Barcelona, that was what we called the first ever prayer book. Once that was written, then other rabbis started writing commentary on it and then a million different prayer books. But that was the first one. It wasn't until 895 CE almost 810 years after the second temple was destroyed. So Jews were doing all kinds of different prayers and stuff. And it took a while before it got, codified. Okay, so Moses, though, even though prayer people didn't necessarily do it 3 times a day until after the second temple was destroyed, Moses knew about the paradigm of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so he himself used to pray 3 times a day. Okay, so that being said, we want to ask this question. When Moses went to pray, and Ken alluded to it, when Moses went to pray, ve'et chanan, ve'et hahi, at that time, after the battle of Sichon and Og, what happened? When he said ve'et chanan, what exactly was his prayer? So if you look now, there's a very, very famous, kind of esoteric and in a hidden place, but it's very famous midrash, which is Devarim Rabbah 11:10 on the back of the page. The Orach Chaim there that I brought, we kind of explained that already, so you don't need to go over that. But look what it says. From where it is it derived that Moses prayed during the period 515 times. So actually, he didn't just offer one prayer, he offered 515 prayers. It is, as it is stated, I pleaded ve'et chanan with the Lord, saying, that's the numerical value of ve'et chanan. So you know how chai is 18? Chet is 10, and yud is, chet is 8, and yud is 10? 10 plus 8, if you can do that in your head, is 18, right? So ve'et chanan, if you add up all the letters, it comes up to 515. So the Midrash infers that Moses asked 515 times. And only after the 515th time did God say, Rav Lecha, enough. Now, what did he, here's something really fascinating. So let me see, how do I want to say this? Okay. Yeah, Rav Lecha. Okay, so when Moses went to pray, he was asking for the same thing 515 times. But the rabbis explain that each time he came up with a new reason why. Right? So, I don't think we do this. When we're praying for something, we show up and we say, God, make my big toe feel better. Whatever is hurting or whatever is bothering us, or, make it so the guy at the car dealership only rips me off 20% of the time that he usually does. I took my car in last week. They said it's going to be $500. And then how often does this happen? An hour or two after you drop it off, there they are. Oh yeah, we found that the windshield wiper is a little bent. That's going to be another $850. And well, can I live without it? Yeah. 850. No, I mean, the windshield wiper fluid looks a little purple. Can I live with it? Not if you want to drive. Okay, just charge my card another $3,000. It's unbelievable. So then I tell them, do it. And then I call my wife, and she said, no, tell them not to. We'll go to Jiffy Lube. Whatever, I don't know. What do I know about cars? So this is what I pray for. I pray this guy doesn't rip me off as much as he usually does. So, I don't know, whatever you're praying for, that's not something to pray for. But whatever you're praying for, you pray for it, and you come back the next time, and you ask the same way. Moses didn't do that. Moses says, okay, I prayed for it this way, and it didn't work, and I'm still working. I'm going to come up with a different approach. And each time he brought a new approach. So he brought 515 different approaches. So you might say, did Moses, and I think this was kind of the understanding, that Moses just sat there and came up with 515 different ways to ask for the same thing all at once. Ve'et chanan, and he pleaded ba'et hahi at that time. So there's a rabbi named the Pnei Yehoshua. That's his commentary on the Torah. I forget when he lived, but actually a commentary on the Talmud. he came up with something that's considered like a famous way of looking at this that's fascinating. So if you look now at the last source, the Pnei Yehoshua, I'm going to try and Google what century he lived in. Okay, 17th century, late 1600s. You know how I'm ambivalent about am I Reform, am I Orthodox, am I Conservative? I don't feel comfortable writing on the board, but I don't mind texting. I'm not sure why. I just to write on the board, Shabbos, but text, looking up something online, it doesn't bother me as much. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, You know what that's called? Reform. That's reform. All right. So, all right. Look what the Pnei Yehoshua says. First, Moshe did not begin to daven until God told him he would defeat Sichon and Og. So we know from the Torah when this started. Rashi points to that conversation, which we looked at the moment Moshe began, when Rashi takes that from the Midrash, at the moment that Moses began to hope that God's vow that he would not enter the land had been nullified. Earlier, there was nothing to pray for. But there was this moment where they conquered Sichon and Og, and at that point, Moses thought that it had been nullified. And because he thought it might be nullified, he started praying. So that conversation, we can go back and see, it took place on the 15th of Av, which is called Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av is a famous day. There's Tisha B'Av, and then there's Tu B'Av, which is the Talmud talks about as a day of love. It's like Jewish Valentine's Day. But the reason why it's invested with such holiness is because this is what happened.
All the other times Moses had prayed was for the Jewish people. This is like the first time he prayed for himself. So maybe.
Okay. Actually, there's 3 times. There's 3 times total. But you're right. Very good. Very good. Okay, so then it says, but Moses didn't have any prophecy until the generation of the spies died, which happened on that day. So the last of the spies died on that day. That's what makes it kind of a special day, because they're the ones who ruined it for everyone. And Moses had nevuah, meaning nevuah is prophecy that during the day, not at night. So third, Moses' prayers were all during weekday Shemona Esrei. Shemona Esrei is the tefillah, the Adonai, that prayer. We know this because we learn the halachas of the laws of Shemona Esrei from his prayers there in the Talmud. Personal requests are not allowed on Shabbat. How many? Okay, so let me just tell you this in English. Here's what the Pnei Yehoshua figured out. From the time that Moses started to pray until this moment, when God tells him no, there were 200 days. He added up the days. And he went to the calendar and he said, so 200 times 3 prayers a day is 600. However, on Shabbat and holidays, you're not allowed to ask for personal prayers. So if you subtract the Shabbats and the holidays that passed on those days, it takes you down to 172. 172 times 3 is 516. But it didn't happen until the day. So in the morning, he didn't daven for it. He didn't pray for it in the morning. So instead of, it's 516 minus 1, which is 515. 515 is the same numerical number of the word ve'etchanan. So he did this numerical value to find out that Moses prayed 515 times. So, but here's the point of that. What he's saying is Moses didn't just, at that moment pray 515 times all in one moment. He prayed 3 times a day for 200 days until God finally told him no. But the point of that is you can't just show up once and pray and think you've done it. it's a lot of work to pray for something, which is like an interesting idea. Still didn't get it. Still didn't get it. Now, I think also, you don't always get what you want, but you're not always supposed to. This is the very deep theologian Garth Brooks once said. Garth Brooks had a song that said, "Sometimes I thank God for unanswered prayers." It's an interesting song. And the reason why is because he was younger, he prayed that he would marry this one girl, and then he didn't. And then he got older, and he found his wife, and he said, "Thank God I didn't marry her." Right? So thank God that prayer wasn't answered. But it could work in other ways too. And, had Moses entered the land of Israel, things wouldn't have worked out as they were supposed to, even though it would have been nice for Moses to have been able to plant a couple of trees and give some extra fruit. Now, here's the one. So all of that, I bring this to show you the importance of prayer and the importance of consistency with our prayer. That if you're not praying 3 times a day, then you're probably not doing enough. And if you're not, at least coming every Shabbos, and you only show up once in a while, and you expect that your prayers could work, God doesn't consider that great. And even in Reform Judaism, somewhere along the way, Reform Jews said, we just don't have to pray. That's not something that we do, which I don't understand. And I'll tell you, when I was in rabbinic school, we used to have afternoon prayers every day. So you'd have like 2 classes, and then there would be a prayers, and then there'd be 3 or 4 more classes, and then, you'd go home or go to the library. And during those prayers, they were like workshops. So like one student would be leading the service, and one student would be giving a sermon, and we were all terrible, but we did it anyway. And but it was, the community prayed together. And they didn't keep attendance. Like if you didn't go, and a lot of kids didn't go, because we would use that time to study or prepare for the next class that we hadn't done the homework for, or whatever. But we would just sit in the hall and talk. But we didn't always go. And one day, one of my history professors, who always went, the professors usually went, but they didn't always go. He just sat there and looked at us. Like we had the class right after service, and most of us weren't in there. He just sat there and he looked at us and he said, "I don't understand why you guys are here. Why weren't you davening? What are we doing here?" And that really stuck with me. But somewhere along the way, it'd be, "Well, I have Yortzeit, so I'll go." Somewhere along the way, we stopped doing communal prayer. And, so someone once said to me, "Wow, you have 1,700 members. When are you going to cap it? And when are you going to say," I said, "Why would we cap it? You can always get a seat. You worried if Friday night's too full? Don't worry. Don't worry. We got room here." When Minion starts at 10:30, if you're just joining now and you're worried, we'll find you. Don't worry. We got room. Okay, now, I wanted to answer, though, the question that I started with. And this is a little bit different. The question is, if God's not going to answer the prayers of soldiers going in, defending their lives and risking their lives for the state of Israel, and they prayed, and they either died or got horribly injured, and I didn't sacrifice anything near what they sacrificed, why would God answer my prayer? And so in thinking about all of this, I came up with an answer. You can take it or leave it, but I came up with this answer. So remember that we said that prayer replaced sacrifice. Clear so far? So during the time that the Holy Temple stood, the temple was a gift to the Jewish people. And the gift was that if you offered the sacrifice, it wasn't a temple just to have a temple. It wasn't a temple to the Romans have the Colosseum and the French have a radio tower and, the British have a clock and we have a temple. That's not what it was. The temple had a purpose. And the purpose was that if you did the sacrifices, then God would answer your prayers and take care of you. That was the purpose.